Okay, so we're going to connect two places you probably never thought had anything to do with each other. The aisles of your favorite warehouse store and the marble halls of the Supreme Court. Yeah, this is a wild story about bulk goods, billions of dollars, and a huge, huge fight over the limits of presidential power.
It sounds like a totally random question, right? I mean, you're there, you're grabbing a rotisserie chicken, a giant pack of paper towels. What on earth could that possibly have to do with the highest court in the United States? Well, as it turns out, a whole lot.
You see, the answer is a massive multi-billion-dollar lawsuit, and it's one that could actually change the price of pretty much everything you buy, because buried in the cost of so many of those items is a fee, a tariff, that Costco is arguing was illegally collected. Their fight to get that money back, it could have a ripple effect that lands right in your wallet.
So, let's get into the main event. This isn't just some quiet disagreement, you know? This is a full-blown lawsuit. We're talking about one of the biggest retailers in the world taking the U.S. government to court. At its core, the issue is pretty simple. Costco has paid a fortune. We're talking potentially billions in these tariffs on goods they import. And now, they're basically saying, hey, wait a minute. Those tariffs were never legal in the first place, and they want every single dollar back.
And this quote right here, this gets to the absolute heart of their legal argument. They are laser-focused on a specific law, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. Costco's whole case is that the president used this law in a way it was never, ever intended, to create tariffs. Their lawyers are arguing that, if you read the law, it just doesn't grant that power.
Oh, and get this, Costco is not on some solo mission here, not at all. A whole wave of other major companies have filed basically the same lawsuit. We're talking about Revlon, the makeup giant, Kawasaki, motorcycles and jet skis, even the company that makes your Ray-Bans and Oakleys, EssilorLuxottica. This is a massive, industry-wide challenge.
So, to really get what's going on in this legal battle, we have to understand the law that's right at the center of it all, the IEEPA. Let's break it down.
So what is it? Well, basically, the IEEPA gives the president really broad powers to regulate the economy if they declare a national emergency. Think of things like sanctions on another country or freezing assets of foreign groups. It's a powerful tool, but it's meant for these really extraordinary situations.
And here is the absolute bombshell, the crucial point of this whole thing. Before the Trump administration, no president had ever used this specific emergency act to just slap tariffs on imports, ever. This was a completely new, and as we're now seeing, a super controversial interpretation of that law. The road to the Supreme Court was pretty dramatic. So first, the tariffs were imposed under the IEEPA. Then, companies like Costco sued. And you know what? The lower courts actually sided with them. They agreed the government's use of the law was wrong. But the story didn't end there. The tariffs stayed in place while the government appealed, and that's how this entire fight landed right on the steps of the Supreme Court for the final word.
Okay, let's talk about why this is such a massive deal. Because the numbers involved here, they are just staggering. For both the government and for hundreds of companies. So since these tariffs were first put in place, the U.S. government has collected, get this, a whopping $205 billion. That is an enormous amount of money flowing from importers and, let's be real, from us, the consumers, straight into government bank accounts.
But here's the kicker. Of that huge number, nearly $90 billion was collected specifically under the IEEPA, the exact law that's being challenged right now. That is the pot of gold, the huge sum of money that's directly at stake in this Supreme Court case. So how does this actually affect a company like Costco? Well, just look at their sales. About a third of everything they sell comes from imported products. And even that 8% from China, which might not sound like a lot, represents billions and billions of dollars in goods, all of which were hit by these new tariffs. It just shows you how exposed a company like that is to sudden changes in trade policy.
And here's where it really hits home. Costco's own CFO said that for really important items, things like pineapples and bananas, they chose to absorb the tariff costs themselves. They didn't pass them on to you. They literally decided to eat the cost and not raise prices just to protect their members, taking a direct hit to their own bottom line.
So, this all leads to a massive showdown at the Supreme Court, where the 9 justices will decide the final outcome. And believe me, this case is about so much more than just money.
When you boil it all down, the case is pretty straightforward. On one side, you've got Costco and all these other businesses saying, look, the president just didn't have the authority to do this under this law. And on the other side, the government is arguing that yes, he did, and these tariffs were a totally lawful and necessary exercise of that power.
And the government's position is really clear here. They're saying if the Supreme Court sides with Costco,
the economic fallout would be massive. We're talking about the possibility of having to refund that entire $90 billion. That really tells you just how high the financial stakes are for them.
Now, this is a super fascinating little detail from inside the courtroom. During the actual oral arguments, reports said that justices from all across the ideological spectrum, we're talking both conservatives and liberals, were asking some really tough questions. They seemed pretty skeptical of the government's claim that the IEEPA could be used this way. Now, that's never a guarantee of how they'll vote, but it is a very, very telling sign.
So, in the end, the final decision rests with the court. But the question this whole thing raises is really for all of us. This case isn't just about tariffs or the price of bananas. It's about a fundamental check on power. How much authority should one person, the president, have to completely reshape the entire global economy? And what's the right balance between that power and the price you and I pay at the checkout counter? There's definitely no easy answer to that.